Once upon a time, in the heart of a vast African forest, there was a small village known as Amaka. Amaka was a peaceful place, surrounded by towering trees, fertile lands, and rivers that shimmered under the warm sun. The villagers were happy, tending to their crops and cattle, telling stories by the fire at night, and celebrating their rich culture. But this peace was shattered each time the night fell, for when the moon climbed high into the sky, this rat was unlike any other creature. It was as tall as a hut, with sharp, gleaming teeth and eyes that glowed like fiery embers in the darkness. Each night, it would leave its lair and charge into the village, causing chaos and destruction. The villagers, in fear, would flee in all directions, leaving behind their food, livestock, and even their homes. The rat, delighting in the terror it spread, would chase them until dawn, gnawing on anything it could find. For weeks, this terror continued. The villagers grew weary of running, their crops withered, and hunger began to set in. They knew they couldn't live like this forever. So they gathered under the great baobab tree in the center of. After much debate, it was decided that the strongest men in the village would confront the rat and end its reign of terror. 10 powerful warriors, known for their bravery and skill, were chosen. They were armed with spears, shields, and charms blessed by the village elders. The villagers felt a glimmer of hope as they watched their finest warriors prepare for battle, confident that the rat's days of. On the night of the full moon, the warriors took their positions, their hearts beating like war drums. The rat emerged from the forest, its monstrous form casting a long shadow over the village. It sniffed the air, sensing the presence of the warriors. With a deafening roar, it charged at them. The battle was fierce, but to the horror of the villagers, the rat was unstoppable. One by one, the mighty warriors fell, their lifeless bodies. Panic gripped the villagers as they witnessed the defeat of their strongest men. They could not believe that the rat had triumphed so easily. Fear spread through the village like wildfire, and the people began packing their belongings, ready to abandon their homes. And as they prepared to leave, a small voice suddenly rang out over the din of the panicking crowd. It was Kofi, a 12-year-old boy, with a heart full of courage and a spirit as fierce as the fiercest lion. "Stop," he cried, standing in the path of the fleeing villagers. The villagers were stunned into silence. Kofi was small, not yet a man, and certainly no warrior. How could a boy hope to defeat the creature that had slain 10 of the village's finest? But Kofi's eyes burned with determination, and something about his unwavering stand. Despite their disbelief, the villagers gathered around Kofi, eager to hear what he had to say. "I know I am just a boy," Kofi began, his voice steady, but the strength of a warrior is not only in his arms, but also in his heart and mind. "I have a plan to defeat the rat." The villagers were skeptical, but they had no other options. With their warriors gone and their hopes dashed, they agreed to listen. Kofi spoke of a trap he had devised, one that relied on the cunning and unity of the village rather than brute strength. The villagers, inspired by Kofi's bravery, decided to put their trust in him. As night fell, Kofi led the villagers to prepare for the rat's return. The women gathered ropes and nets, the men dug deep pits, and the elders chanted protective prayers over the village. Everyone had a role to play, and for the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of purpose and hope. Kofi stood at the edge of the village, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for the giant rat to appear. The moon rose high, and soon enough, the ground began to tremble. The rat was coming. But this time, the villagers were not running. They were ready to face the beast together, with Kofi leading the way. The rat emerged from the forest, its eyes glowing with a fierce hunger. It charged toward the village, but Kofi stood his ground. With a sharp whistle, he signaled the villagers, and they sprang into. Kofi knew this was their only chance. He darted forward with a spear in hand, aiming for the rat's heart. The rat roared and lunged at him, but Kofi was quick. With all his strength, he thrust the spear into the beast, praying that it would be enough to end its terror once and for all. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The villagers held their breath as they watched the giant rat struggle, the spear lodged deep in its chest. But to their dismay, the rat did not fall. It pulled the spear out with a ferocious snarl, its eyes now locked on Kofi. The boy took a step back, realizing that his plan had not been enough. But just as the rat was about to pounce, something miraculous happened. The charms that the elders had placed on the spear began to glow with a brilliant light. The rat screeched in pain as the magic took hold, weakening its immense strength. Kofi, seeing the creature, the giant rat let out one last roar before collapsing to the ground. its massive body lying still at Kofi's feet. The villagers erupted into cheers, rushing forward to lift Kofi onto their shoulders. They had been saved, not by the strongest warrior, but by the courage and intelligence of a young boy who refused to give up. From that day on, Kofi was celebrated as a hero in Amaka. The villagers rebuilt their homes, their lives returning to the peaceful rhythm they had once known. And each night, as they gathered around the fire to tell stories, they would remember the bravery of the boy who had faced the giant rat. And days after Kofi's heroic defeat of the giant rat, Amaka began to return to normal. The villagers worked together to rebuild their homes and replant their crops. Peace settled over the village once more, but there was an unease in the air, a feeling that one night, as the villagers gathered around the fire to celebrate, a strange wind began to blow through the village. It carried with it a low, whispering sound that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The villagers exchanged nervous glances, wondering if this was a sign of another. Kofi, who had been sitting quietly by the fire, listening to the stories of old, felt the wind brush against his face. The whispers seemed to speak directly to him, though he couldn't make out the words. Troubled, he excused himself and walked to the edge of the village where the trees stood. As Kofi stood at the edge of the forest, the whispering wind grew stronger, swirling around him. Suddenly, out of the shadows, an old man emerged. He was hunched over, his long white hair and beard flowing in the wind. The villagers knew him as the old hermit, a wise man who lived deep in the forest and read. The hermit called out, his voice crackling like dry leaves. "I have come to warn you. The giant rat you defeated was not an ordinary beast. It was sent by dark forces that dwell in the depths of this forest. The battle you've..." Kofi's heart skipped a beat. He had thought the rat was a one-time threat, but now it seemed that something much more sinister was at play. "What do you mean, old hermit?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. The old hermit sighed, his eyes filled with sorrow. "There is an ancient evil that has been awakened. The rat was just the first of many trials. You have proven yourself brave and strong, but you must prepare for what is to come. The forces that sent the rat will not stop until they have destroyed everything you hold dear." That night, Kofi returned to the village with the old hermit's warning weighing heavily on his mind. He tried to sleep, but his thoughts were troubled. A voice whispered in his ear, cold and taunting, "You will fail them. You are just a boy unworthy of their trust. You will watch as everything you love is destroyed." Kofi closed his eyes, shutting out the vision of destruction before him. He knew this was a test, a trial designed to break him. He forced himself to remember all that he had fought for, the lives he had saved, and the love he held for his village. Kofi's mind echoed with the words of the old hermit, the oracle, and the villagers who had believed in him. "This is not real," Kofi murmured to himself. "I have faced worse and emerged victorious. I will not be swayed by fear." With those words, the vision began to fade, and Kofi felt his strength returning. He opened his eyes to find the chamber restored, the flame burning brighter than before. The guardians were watching him, their expressions hidden, but Kofi could sense their approval. NMD emerged from his trial at the same moment, his face grim but determined. It was clear that he too had faced his own inner demons and had emerged stronger for it. The lead guardian stepped forward once more, his voice resonating with respect. "You have both passed the trial of the heart," the guardian declared. "You have proven yourselves worthy of the flame. But know this, the power you seek comes with great responsibility. Use it wisely, for it can bring both salvation and destruction." With that, the flame that does not burn began to swirl and expand, enveloping Kofi and Namdi in its warm golden light. They felt the power of the flame seep into their very beings, filling them with a strength unlike any they had ever known. The chamber was silent as Kofi and Namdi stood bathed in the glow of the flame. They could feel the energy coursing through their bodies, a power that was both humbling and exhilarating. The guardians stepped back, allowing the flame to work its magic. As the light of the flame slowly receded, it left behind a small glowing ember in Kofi's hand. It pulsed with warmth and light, and Kofi knew that this was the essence of the flame, a gift that would help them in the battles to come. Nanamdi received a similar ember, his eyes wide with wonder. "This ember will guide you," the lead guardian explained. "It will light your path in times of darkness and give you the strength to overcome the challenges ahead. But remember, it is not the flame itself that holds the power, it is the heart that wields it. Trust in yourselves and you will find the way." With the guardian's final words, the chamber began to fade, and Kofi and Enem Namdi found themselves standing once more at the entrance of the cave, the embers glowing softly in their hands. They knew that their journey was far from over, but with the flame's gift, they felt more prepared than ever to face the darkness that awaited them. Kofi and Nanamdi began their descent from the mountain of shadows, their spirits lifted by the flame's gift. The journey down was as perilous as the climb up, but the two warriors moved with renewed purpose, their steps sure and steady. As they neared the base of the mountain, they noticed the signs of a coming storm. The sky darkened, and the wind began to howl, but Kofi held the glowing ember tightly, its warmth and light guiding them through the gathering gloom. Nnamdi did the same, trusting in the power they had been granted. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, they saw that Amaka was in turmoil. Dark clouds loomed overhead, and the villagers were huddled together, fearful of what was to come. Kofi and Nnamdi rushed into the village, and the sight of them brought a glimmer of hope to the villagers' eyes. Kofi wasted no time in gathering the elders and the strongest warriors. He told them of the flame and the power they had been given, and how it could help them in the battles ahead. The villagers listened with rapt attention, their fears slowly turning into determination. With the storm brewing on the horizon, Kofi knew that the final battle was approaching. The dark forces would not wait, and neither could they. The villagers, now united in purpose, began preparing for what was to come. Kofi and Nnamdi used the power of the flame to strengthen the village's defenses. The embers they carried could light even the darkest corners of the forest, revealing the creatures that lurked within. They taught the villagers how to harness the flame's energy, using it to fortify their weapons and protect their homes. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, the villagers worked tirelessly, knowing that their survival depended on their efforts. Kofi could see the determination in their eyes, and it gave him hope. He knew that they were ready, and that together they could face whatever the darkness would throw at them. But even as they prepared, Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was yet to come. The flame had given them strength, but it had also revealed the depth of the darkness they faced. The final battle would be unlike any they had fought before, and Kofi knew that it would test them all to their limits. The day of the final battle arrived with a deafening roar of thunder. The storm that had been building for days finally broke, and the sky was lit up by flashes of lightning. The villagers gathered in the center of Amaka, their faces set with determination, their weapons at the ready. Kofi and Nnamdi stood at the front of the group, the glowing embers in their hands lighting the way. They knew that the dark forces were close, that the storm was a sign of their approach. The air was thick with tension, and the village was eerily silent, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the forest. The villagers gripped their weapons tighter, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. And then, with a blinding flash of lightning, the dark forces emerged from the forest, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The creatures that emerged from the forest were unlike anything the villagers had seen before: tall, shadowy figures with twisted limbs and glowing red eyes. Their forms seemed to shift with every movement, as though they were made of smoke and darkness. The air filled with a deafening roar as they charged toward the village, and the ground trembled under their weight. Kofi stood at the forefront, his heart pounding in his chest, but he did not falter. He raised the glowing ember in his hand, and it burst into a brilliant light, illuminating the battlefield. The creatures recoiled from the flame's power, but only for a moment before they lunged forward with renewed ferocity. "Hold the line," Kofi shouted to the villagers. "Do not let fear take hold. The flame will guide us." The warriors of Amaka surged forward, their weapons glowing with the light of the flame as they clashed with the dark forces. The battle was fierce and chaotic, with both sides fighting with all their strength. Nnamdi fought by Kofi's side, his spear slicing through the shadowy figures with deadly precision. Despite their courage, the villagers were vastly outnumbered, and the darkness seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. For every creature they struck down, two more appeared in its place, their snarls filling the air. The storm raged overhead, casting eerie shadows over the battlefield, but Kofi refused to give in to despair. Amid the chaos of battle, Kofi realized that brute strength alone would not win this fight. The flame had given them a glimpse of its power, but there was something more. He had to uncover something deeper within the flame's magic that could turn the tide. In a moment of clarity, Kofi shut out the sounds of battle around him and focused on the glowing ember in his hand. He remembered the Guardian's words: "The power is not in the flame itself, but in the heart that wields it." Kofi closed his eyes and let the warmth of the flame flow through him, not as a weapon, but as a guide. In his mind's eye, he saw the village of Amaka as it had once been, full of life and peace, untouched by the darkness. He saw the faces of the people he was fighting to protect his family, his friends, and the future generations that depended on this moment. As Kofi's resolve strengthened, the ember in his hand began to glow brighter, its light spreading across the battlefield. The shadowy creatures paused, momentarily blinded by the radiant glow. The flame pulsed with a new energy, one that Kofi could feel coursing through his veins. Kofi and Nnamdi called, noticing the change. "What are you doing?" Kofi opened his eyes, his face calm but determined. "I'm trusting the flame," he replied, and with a burst of light, he thrust the glowing ember into the air. The flame erupted in a blinding wave of light that swept across the battlefield, washing over the shadow creatures and the villagers alike. The creatures howled in pain as the light burned away the darkness that bound them, their twisted forms dissolving into nothingness. The storm above began to break, and for the first time in days, the sky cleared. The village of Amaka was bathed in the warm glow of the rising sun. As the light faded, the battlefield grew quiet. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their weapons still in hand, unsure of what had just happened. The dark forces that had once seemed unstoppable were gone, reduced to nothing by the power of the flame. Kofi and the Namdi looked around at their fellow warriors, many of whom were injured but alive. Relief washed over them as they realized they had survived the impossible. The villagers began to cheer, their voices rising in celebration. They had won. Kofi, still holding the glowing ember, felt its warmth pulsing gently in his hand. He knew that the victory was not his alone, but the result of the courage and unity of the entire village. The flame had given them strength, but it was their hearts that had seen them through. As the villagers gathered around Kofi, they looked at him with newfound respect. He had been the one to lead them, to trust in the flame when all hope seemed lost. He had proven that even the smallest among them could make the greatest difference. The village of Amaka was forever changed after that day. The people rebuilt their homes and lives, but they did so with a deeper understanding of their strength and resilience. They no longer feared the dark forces, for they had faced them and emerged victorious. Kofi